yet another video for the sets for the series. In today's video, we'll be focusing on aggregate function. Now, what is an aggregate function? An aggregate function in SQL is a function that operates in a set of values, typically in a specific columns that can return a single value as a result. These functions are used to perform various calculations on a set of rows and are often used in addition to a group by. As part of the hands-on exercise, we're going to see when the group by is applied and why we need it. The aggregate function is very, very important because it helps us to summarize and generate insight in our data that is a very large information. So without further ado, let's jump into the code and begin to write SQL to understand what aggregate function is all about. As usual, as our routine from the beginning of this series is that we start our code by writing use by indicating the database that we want to use. So we specify the database that we need to use. We said we're going to use the Paulins data tech to write the code. And when we do that, our code is successful and we have the database listed at the top left. So now at this point, we're going to go in and begin to answer various questions related to aggregate function. The first thing that we want to look at is that we want to answer a question that says, so meanwhile, the aggregate functions that we're focusing on is the count, is the sum, the mean, the max, and the average. So let's start by answering the very first question here that says, write a query that will retrieve the total count of all registered patients in the system. The total count. So at this point, all I can do, I can write a select star, of course, to gain access to the table. The table name is dvo.patient name. Now, if I run this code, pay attention to something. When I run this code, I can see that at the bottom, I got 60 rows. That is the total count of the registered patients. But we don't want to see this. Remember the definition of the aggregate function. It returns a single value for a particular result set. So what we want to do, we want to count it. We want to retrieve the total count. So we can come down here and call this aggregate function called count. We're going to put open and close a parenthesis. Remember now we are working with function. Each time we are working with function, a function is a predefined set of codes that we called upon to perform specific actions. See the function like your remote for your TV. There are a bunch of buttons on the remote. Anything you press on that remote perform a specific action. So see that remote as what a function is. And in a function, when you call the function name, it is followed by an open and close parenthesis, which indicates that, for example, this count is a function. And now, when we open and close the parenthesis, inside of this parenthesis, we supply something. That thing we supply is called an argument. This argument is what we supply that we'll use to perform the action. So we want to calculate or retrieve all the total count of registered patients in the system. At this point, what I can do, I will supply a star. And when I supply a star, I run this guy, it gives me 60 rows. But we need to make our report look a little bit user-friendly. If I see at the top, it says it is no column name. We can add flavor to it and give it an alias that says as patient count. And if I run it now, I can see that I have patient counts at 60. So far, so good. Right. Now, we look at this. We have other things we can do with it, but we'll move on to get the concept of the whole thing. We have another question that wants us to retrieve the total number of appointments by each provider. Pay attention to the question. We want to return the total number of appointments by each provider. So if we have 200 appointments in the appointments table, those 200 appointments could be partitioned or divided by each provider. So we need to do something addition to what we already have here. So to do this, let's see how the code will look once we write it. So we come down to our information, to our set, we create our select star. So there are two tables involved in this exercise. The first one is the DBO dot appointments table, and the second one is the DBO dot provider table. And at this point, if I run this patients table, let's keep track of something. We have 82 patients. And if I check this provider table, we have 40 providers. So you can see that these providers, these appointments are divided into these providers. So we're going to see how many each one of them made, or how many appointments were covered by each of these providers. So to do this, we go in, first of all, let's do our joins. Remember, the appointment is the main thing that we are looking for. So we're going to come down here. I will give this an alias of apps for appointment, and I will do a left join. And when I do a left join, I'm doing a left join to the dbo.provider. So the left join or left join, and I'm doing it to the dbo.provider. And I'll give the provider as pro. I'll put an AS here just to make things stay organized. And then I have to do my join. Remember, this is how they are related. If you missed anything about join, please check the join, the retrieving record from multiple tables. You will see how we talked about join and moving forward. So I want to join in. How do they come? I'll call the appointment table dot provider appointment ID. I will do provider ID, because in the appointment table, let's verify. This is where we check for things. If we check in the appointment table, there is a provider. So we do apps.provider and equals, we do pro.provider. And if we run this code like this, we can see that we still get the standard 82 rows. But now let's begin to add the flavor that they want. The count of all appointments. So this is the count of all appointments, which should correspond to 82. So if I run this guy, I get 82. But this 82, we want to partition it to go among all the providers. So I can call this guy, I'll call this guy total we do total appointments. And if I run it, that is correct. Total appointment is 82. But now we want to put the providers. So at this provider, we can come down and call the pro dot, we can call the provider first name. If we want to take it a little bit, which we haven't talked about, concat, we can do something else. We'll talk about string functions. But now the interesting thing is that if I run this code now, we will have a problem because the code will fail. And the reason why it will fail is that we need to put a group by, and we'll see what SQL tells us once we do that. So when I run this code, I have a problem that says the column dbo.provider.first name is invalid in the select statement because it is not contained in either an aggregate function or a group by. So when we are working with aggregate function, everything that happens in the select statement, if they are not on an aggregate function like this guy, we need to put that thing that is not an aggregate into a group by. Make sense? Into a group by. So for that, because this guy is not on an aggregate function, it is not attached to an aggregate function. So that means this guy needs to appear in a group by, and that is the first name. And that is what SQL is explaining to us. So we can come down here and say group by. And what am I grouping by? I am grouping by the first name. And if I run this guy, I can now see how they are partitioned. We can see that Dr. Ahmed have 3 appointments. Benjamin have 3. We can see the ones that have 7, and so on and so forth. So, but another thing, I can choose not to put the star. I can choose to put the appointment ID, because remember the IDs, they are unique. So let me copy this guy. I'll take this guy off. Let me copy this guy and place it here and write this code a different way. I can come down here. I got 22. So let me keep track of it. Keep track of the record. I got 22 rows for this query. I can come down here, and rather than putting star, I can come down and say I want to put apps dot appointment ID. If I do this, it's still a valid code, and if I run it, I can see that I still have 22 rows. Still 22 rows. But now, one question is that even though I wasn't asked, they didn't ask me as part of this question, but if I'm doing an audit for audit purposes, we want to find out providers that have more than a specific amount of appointments. We can easily do that by coming after the group by. I'll keep this guy. I'll copy this one and still paste it here. By coming after the group by, we can add another flavor to the code, and that will be to add a having. There's a filter called having. This having is used to filter grouped information. So we have a where clause that filters row, and we have a having that filters grouped information. So if I want to find out providers that have seen or scheduled or have an appointment, more than 5 appointments, I can come down here and say having. I will grab this guy because this is the guy that is giving us the count, the aggregates basically, and say when it is greater than 5. And when I do that and run it, I can see the particular patients, sorry, the particular providers that have more than 5 appointments. So that is how we can filter a grouped information, or that's how we can filter an aggregate information. So I can make a comment here for the sake of note. I say this is like a where clause. A where clause that filters grouped information. So far, so good. Right? So let's move on to the next one. The next one is that we want to write a query that will retrieve the minimum age of all registered employees. The minimum age of all registered employees. So, minimum. If I come down here, I can write my select star, of course, and go to inside of the table. It is dvo.patients table. And if I run this guy, I don't mean to open a new line, a new session. If I run this guy, I can see the date of birth. So I'm looking for the minimum patient, the minimum age of the registered patient, the minimum. So I can come down here, take off the star, and I can now say, get me the minimum. I say the minimum, and I'm looking for the minimum date of birth, which is the date of birth. As I call this guy as minimum age. And when I run it, I can see that the minimum age of the registered patient is October 5th, 1972. So far, so good? Perfect. So we're moving forward. So basically what the minimum do, it will bring the smallest age, right? So, but there are other things we can find a way between this age and today, what was the minimum age, but we're not going into that at this point. When we talk about date function, we might touch into some of this stuff, but for now we want to focus on aggregate function. So moving on, let's answer this next question. If the average duration of the associated with C. So let's answer this question. We want to answer and retrieve the maximum bill amount that is associated with each procedure. So you can see we have two tables. The first table is the bill amount. Select staff from the DVO dot the bill amount. And there's another table that is select staff from the DVO dot procedure table. If I go into the bill amount, I can see that I have a bill amount. And if I go into the procedure table, which have a problem because there's no procedure, so we need to surround this table with a square bracket because a procedure is a reserve, it's a A procedure is actually a something or routine in SQL. So that is why SQL thought it was something else. But now we want to do our join. So the join on this, we do a left join. Because remember, if I run the procedure, for example, sorry, if I run the billing, the major focus or our focus table is this particular table. That is why we know that we need to enforce the result to focus on this particular guy. And once I do the left join, I want to left join on the DVO dot procedure table. And once I do that, remember again, I have to put the square bracket just to shut SQL up. So I need to do a join. So I have to give this guy an alias. I can call this guy BLL, which is for bill, and I can call this guy POR for procedure. I have to join it to, in the bill table, there is a procedure ID. And in the procedure table, there is a procedure ID. And now if I run my code, it looks okay. But now the point is I want to get the maximum bill amount per each procedure. And if we go into the procedure table, we can see that we have an associated, we have the procedure date, procedure ID. We can either do, and this is where we can call the column that we want to associate it with. So maybe procedure description, but the procedure ID is what we need. So I can come down back here. First of all, get the max. My max that I want to get, inside of it, I need to supply the argument. The argument that I want to get from this max, I want to get the bill amount. One at a time, right? I can run this code by itself. It's telling me that this is the maximum bill amount. But now, per the procedure ID or associated to each procedure ID, I can now call the procedure ID. Now, when I do that, I have a problem that tells me a problem called ambiguous column. So if I hover around it, I can see ambiguous column name. So I can come down here, this procedure that I am looking for, I am looking for the procedure for the bill. I'm looking for the bill procedure. And now when I run this guy, the code will fail because it is looking for a group by. Remember the rule. If it is not associated to a group, to an aggregate function, we need to put it in a group by. So I can come down here and say group by. And I'm grouping by the bill procedure. And if I run it now, I can see that the maximum procedure amount for each provider or procedure is this dollar amount by the side. So I can come down here and give this guy an alias called max bill amount. And once I do that, I can now run it one more time to see how my code looks. And this is it. I now have a column name. I can take this guy off because we don't need it. So let's move on and answer the last, how many questions? 3 questions that we have. This question says we should retrieve the average duration of procedures performed by each provider. The average procedure, the average duration. So if we come down here, so there are 2 tables involved from the high level. Okay, right select, start from I'm looking for the DBO dot procedure table. And there's another table we need to look for. Select start from DBO dot provider. And if I run the procedure, of course, you know we're going to have a problem. So I'm going to put the square bracket around it and check it. When I do this, I can see the procedure date and the cost of that procedure. But now, if I go to the provider, I can see the provider information. Our main focus is to get the average time for each provider. So that means the duration. This is 1 hour and 45 minutes. And I also want to find the average for each provider. And we can see a provider ID. So the first thing we will do here is to give this guy an alias of Pro C. Proc is another thing, so I'm going to call PROC. Then I'm going to do a left join. Then the reason of a left join is because this is our main focus table. I can come in here and I say left join to the DBO dot provider table. And I will call this guy as Pro. And I want to do it on the PROCE dot provider ID. No, we can do procedure ID. Let me see the table. Sorry. I have to check this procedure. Yeah, we have a provider, so we can come down here. We say provider ID, and equal. We want this one to be PROV dot provider ID. And if I run this guy, I can see that my code looks okay. But the goal here is for us, how many procedures do they have? 40, which makes sense because the provider is also 40, I believe. Yeah, the provider is also 40. So 40 provider, 40 procedure. So at this point, I can now add the flavor that they have. So now we can now add the average information that they are looking for. And that average that they are looking for, we just need to add it to our code. And I can come down here and I can say, get me the average. And the average that I'm looking for is the average, open and close. I am looking for duration, average duration. So when I do the duration, I can come down here and give it an alias name called AVG duration. But now I need to add another information, and that information is the provider name, and that is I think we have a provider is PROV dot. We need the first name of the provider. Just use the first name. We use the first name. But remember now, if I run this guy, I will have a problem. Why? Because it's telling me a voucher. Okay, we can always look a way to go around that because it shouldn't be a problem. So at this point, we can come down and look at what is going on here. So it is having a problem because if we go into the provider table, so if we go into the prescription table, the procedure table, sorry, the procedure, DBO dot procedure, we can see that we have the duration. If I run this guy, pay attention to the duration. the duration have some weird information. And those weird informations are looking like they are a mixture of both numbers and characters. They are mixtures of numbers and characters. So that means we can try to do something else to our code. At this point, we have to look at it and say, there are some information that has not been talked about in terms of like how you convert things to a different data type. But to solve this problem that we have, it is because, again, I explain one more time. It is because on this procedure table, if you focus on the duration, it has a number. There are a couple things we can do. And that thing is we have to script it out to get only numbers before this problem can work. Not that we cannot do it. We can do it, but we haven't talked about certain lectures in the series. But I'm going to keep this at the back burner when we talk about how we work with string functions and how we talk about converting converting data types. Then we can check this. So I will keep this in the bonus, stick around with the series. These problems will be solved. So I'm going to make a note for myself. I will put it here and say revisit. Revisit whenever you get whenever you get to the string function and date conversion. So data conversion, not date conversion. Data conversion. Data conversion. So we'll visit this guy. So don't. It's not that it's not doable. It's doable, but I don't want to deviate away from this particular lecture. So let's keep going and work on the two problems. The next problem is for us to retrieve the total number, the total medical staff members that are associated with each particular address type. So we have home, we could have home, office, billing, or whatever, but each one of them that are associated to a particular data type, a staff ID. So we can come here, there are two tables, remember, not only two. Because it tells us this doesn't mean it is only two tables. We still need a bridge table. So let me come down here and show you what I mean. So if I write a select star from, I do DBO dot, they say staff members. Let's start with the staff, medical staff. We start with the medical staff and we run it. We can see that we only have address ID in this table. We do not have an address type, but that is not enough to conclude. So we can come down here and say select start from. When I say from, I say DBO dot. I want to go to the address type that is confirmed. So if I look at this guy, I can see that there is no address ID that is associated here, but we have an address type ID. So let's look into the address table. I look into this address table to DBO dot address table. And when I look into this address table, I can see that there is an address type. So this address table will be a bridge for me to get to the staff and to the address type. So with that in mind, we can come down here and give this guy an alias of MS. which is medical staff, and I'm going to call the left join. And at the left join that I am calling, I want to call the DBO.address ID, address type. I will call this guy as ASS or ADS. Let's call it ADS. And we'll say on MS dot address ID and go down and say equal ADS dot address ID. And if I run this guy now, I can see some good information that I returned record. The next thing now is also a left join to the address type ID because now I have gotten a bridge table. I say DBO dot address type, and I give this guy ADST for address type, and let me put this here. And now I call how are they related? They will be related using, because now I'm joining the address type to the address ID. So I can come down here, I say A, I say ADST dot address type ID equals A equals ADS dot address type ID. Now, if I run it to see the records that we have records, everything looks good. So now at this point, we begin to add the information that we need. They want us to bring the total of all the staff members. So I can come down here. The first thing I want to do, remember my goal is to maintain the staff ID. That is why I did the left join. So I open count, I can call the medical staff ID. I think there is something called medical staff. Medical, okay, let me see the columns that it have by just giving the alias. I can say alias is MS dot, I can find the ID of that MS, and that ID is staff ID. So I can call the staff ID. And if I run this guy, I can see the total record that I have that is 70. But I want to get it per the address type ID. So I can come down here, put a comma, and I call the address type ID, which is ADST dot. I am looking for the name. And when I do that, if I run this query like this, it will fail looking for a group by. So now on this group by, I have to put GB group by. The group by that I am calling, I'm grouping by this guy that is not in an aggregate function. And if I do this and run it, now it tells me 41 staff IDs. Let me put this guy as, I can call this guy, staff count. Now, if I run this guy now, I can see that 41 staff, medical staff have a home address and 29 have a primary address, which is good. So far, so good. So let's knock off the last one. The last one said we should retrieve the total billing amount per each patient. The total billing amount per each patient, we can get this by saying there are two tables, or at least from a high level, there are two tables. We're going to find out if that is the case. So the first thing is the bill amount, say DBO dot bill amount. And the next one is select star from DBO dot patient ID. Patient ID, sorry, patient. And when I run this guy, I see this rows. And when I run this one, I equally see this row. So now at this point, I can come down and begin to look my joint. So let's look at the bill. When we look at the billing, we can see a patient ID. So we're good. We don't need a bridge table. So I can come down here and I say we want to return, we want to do a join. I'll call this guy as Bill. And I come down here, do a left join. Left join. And the left join, I'm joining to dbu dot patient's ID. And I will call this guy as PAT. And I want to do this on how they are related. Patient dot patient ID equal billing bill dot patient ID. And if I run this guy, I can see that it returns the record. But the main thing I want to do is to get the actual total of the billing amount. So the total, this is where I come down, I call the sum. Sum, the sum of bill amount from that particular table of what we have, we can call the bill amount. And when I run it, this is the total sum of the bill amount, but it is per each patient, how much each patient have paid so far. So we can come down here. We can just extract the patient first name. So we can do PAT dot first name. And when I do that, remember if I run it like that, it's going to blow up. So we're going to add our group by. I come down here as a group by. I put this guy and I run it. It tells me how much each patient have paid per what we have in the system. And with this, we come to the end of the video for aggregate function. So the aggregate function helps us to really extract insights from our table and our data, and we're able to do some kind of reporting. The next video that we're going to be bringing will be a date function, where we can look at how we can add things into the date or remove stuff or slice the date and get some kind of understanding of extracting insight also from the data. So the most important thing is that you just need to look at the result, see how the result is pointing you to useful information. And from there, we can also go in and understand what our data is telling us. So I encourage you or plead with you to subscribe to the channel, to also like the video and click on the notification button so that when I upload another video, I tend to be uploading videos every Mondays and Fridays so that you will be notified. So I look forward to seeing you on Monday. I'll be uploading the next video for the date function and see you soon. Thank you and stay safe. Bye-bye.